Welcome to Every Church a Peace Church, a program dedicated to the belief that the church could turn the world toward peace if every church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. I'm John Stoner, the National Coordinator of Every Church of Peace from Akron, Pennsylvania. Your usual host here, Don Edwards, has invited me to share this program with Damu Smith, our guest from Washington, D.C. Damu is founder and co-director of Black Voices for Peace, and he's also executive director of the National Black Environmental Justice Network. So he has a range of interests and a history of active work for justice and peace. Our particular topic today is the phenomenon of Christian Zionism in the United States and in the world. And Damu and I recently both attended a conference in Jerusalem, attended by around 500 people from some 30 countries on the theme of Christian Zionism. And that was sponsored by an organization called Sabeel. Damu, welcome to this program.
Glad to be back.
And you know, that word Sabeel means the way. I wonder what Jesus meant when he said, "I am the way." Do you have a comment on that?
Well, the way of truth, the way of justice, the way of love, the way of righteousness. These are the things that Jesus taught. And the policy of our nation towards the place where we were meeting at the recent Sabeel conference has really flown in the face of those values. We were gathered in Jerusalem. There are 500-some people from around the world, as you mentioned, in a place that is very beautiful, but at the same time at war and very conflicted and very tense. People are dying. Palestinians and Israelis are dying as a result of a great injustice, and that is the continued occupation of Palestinian land and the brutality of that policy by Israel with the support of the United States against the Palestinian people. I know that there are some people who are watching this broadcast and saying, what is that man talking about? And this gets to the problem of what we were addressing at this conference, because people think that if you criticize Israel for anything, that it's anti-Semitic and that it's a problem. And I've always asked the question, what makes Israel so sacrosanct in terms of whether or not we can criticize it? Israel is doing some very wrong things in that part of the world with the support of our government, and unfortunately, majority of the American people don't know about it. But it's people in this Christian Zionist movement, people like Jerry Falwell and others, who are using biblical scripture to justify foreign policy, that is, blind, uncritical support for Israel, this view that Jews are the chosen people, that Israel is this beacon of light for the world. These ideas, I want to be clear when I say what I'm saying. I'm not saying anything against Jews. I'm saying this idea that Jews are the chosen people gives people the idea that we cannot in any way chastise or criticize what the government of Israel is doing. And that is wrong, because it's getting us in a lot of trouble around the world.
Well, Damu, Israel had prophets, people called prophets, as well as land. So did those prophets criticize the empire or the king? What did the prophets have to say to Israel?
Well, you know, in that time, when Jesus walked the earth.
And he was a prophet, too.
Well, that's why I want to talk with Jesus first.
Okay.
You know, the Roman Empire was doing its thing. And when Jesus spoke up, he was critical of the things that were going on in Palestine. He didn't hesitate to speak. And Jesus was about the business of, again, feeding people who were hungry, healing people who were sick, and speaking to the injustices of the day. And that message must reign today. If we're going to serve as Jesus served, we must speak as Jesus spoke. And we must speak against this great injustice. And that injustice is this ongoing evil occupation that is creating so much suffering and so much dislocation for the Palestinian people, but at the same time is creating so much instability in that part of the world. It has led to several major wars, and it continues to have our nation bound up in a foreign policy that has us spending so much money and sending so many troops to that part of the world. The Iraq War, in my view, has been fought in large measure because of urging on the part of the current Israeli leadership through Ariel Sharon, that wanted to get Saddam Hussein out of the way, and even if there were no weapons of mass destruction and no link to al-Qaeda, the United States was going to do that. In fact, some people in the administration have said this. That is indeed one of the reasons why the United States went to war against Iraq, because of the urging of the current Israeli leadership.
You spoke of dislocation of people in Palestine and of occupation. I wonder how many Americans have an idea of how many Palestinian people were displaced, refugeed, driven from land and home in 1948 when the Jewish state was established. Both international historians, including some Jewish historians, say clearly that there were approximately 800,000 Palestinian people driven from their homes, 8/10 or 80% of the Palestinian population in 1948. That is a wrong which is not easily passed over or forgotten. When that much land and that many people are displaced, and that much land is taken over, there is a reaction.
Well, and a lot of people don't know this history. They think of Israel, and they think of Israel as this place that's just been there. There are really many people who don't know that Israel came into being in 1948, and they don't know that when it came into being, as you mentioned, thousands of Palestinians were expelled. You know, there are Palestinians living in refugee camps all over the Middle East, and they have keys to their homes. They still hold the keys to their homes. They were there too. It wasn't just Jews. They have been on this land for thousands of years, and they are being ethnically cleansed away from this land by systematic policies being engaged in by the Israeli government with the support of the United States. And I tell you, the Palestinians have already made great compromises. The fact that there has been acceptance by many Palestinians of the state of Israel is a historic compromise, I might say. So now there have been all of these peace plans and schemes that would bring about a Palestinian state, some of which has been offered, would parcel out Palestinian land into these little Bantustans, as I would call them, that separate Palestinian communities, that have Jewish-only roads and highways going through those places to serve the settlements that are on these lands, built in defiance of United Nations resolutions. They are illegal, they are immoral, and these are nothing but colonial posts of occupation on behalf of Israel. And that's why there's so much conflict and tension in the occupied territories, because Israel has built these settlements. You have Jews who've come all the way from New York to settle in Palestinian land.
Oh, yeah.
We're part of this. And so this tension is there. And it's a real problem when you think about the fact that this is not being exposed to the United States people and the world.
Well, the nations which had a lot to do with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 included England or Britain. And Lord Balfour was one of the people. There was a Balfour Declaration which said there must be a land for Jews. And he wrote a letter in 1919 to Lord Curzon which said, "In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. The four great powers are committed to Zionism. And Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes. of far profounder import than the desires or prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. That was a moment of truth there when he admitted there were 700,000 inhabitants in that land at that time. One of the Jewish myths, I regret to say, is that Israel became a land, it was a land without a people for a people without a land. Well, Palestine was not a land without a people.
Absolutely. And there was something else in that statement that you just read that was very important, which gets to a key aspect of operational Zionism in the world, functional Zionism. And that is this idea that, you might criticize this, and there might be some problem here, but you know it's okay if we do it. Meaning, in this context, Arabs were there, they're going to be kicked out. So what? It's for the greater good of the Zionist dream, and that policy holds today with both the practitioners of that kind of expression of Zionism and those who support Zionism using biblical scripture to justify what Israel does. So Israel can massacre, Israel can murder, Israel can occupy, but it's okay because it's for the chosen people. It's for the promised land. It's for Judea and Samaria and the greater good. So all these things are very dangerous.
I remind our listeners it was not okay with the prophets of Israel that those things were done. And any critique we give of Israel today was given in spades by the prophets long before us. And only by ignoring the prophets can Israel behave the way it does as a nation in today's world. Speaking about Israel's behavior, what about that wall that's being built? You saw that wall in Israel dividing Israelis from Palestinians, Palestinians from Palestinians, even as much or more. What does it mean to build a wall like that in the year 2004?
It's divisive, and it's literally and practically divisive. It divides Palestinians from Palestinians. This is not about security. This is about more land theft by the Israelis for this Zionist dream that Sharon has of conquering all of the land of Palestine and leaving Palestinians powerless. And if that means dividing them from each other and dividing them from Jews, that's what it means. Israel is rapidly transforming itself into an apartheid-like state, much like we had in South Africa. I know those are harsh words, but they're true words. I've been to South Africa many times, and I've seen what has been done to black South Africans, the way they have been divided, the way they were divided under apartheid rule, the way they were segregated from whites. The same thing has happened in Palestine. This is a wall about further dividing Palestinians from Jews and Palestinians from Palestinians in order to weaken them, in order to suffocate them politically and economically. You have Palestinians who cannot see their neighbors anymore because that big wall is standing there. In some places 26 feet high.
I hope that our viewers are seeing the wall. Let's get that picture up if it hasn't been up, because it's a high wall, close to 30 feet high.
Yes.
And the piece of the wall I saw had graffiti on it which said, paid for by America. And then it also said, this wall will fall. And I think both of those things are true.
Well, it will fall, but I tell you, at this time, that wall symbolizes both in practice and in theory everything that's wrong with the occupation. Palestinians are being driven from their homes. Thousands of them have their homes bulldozed. There are thousands of homeless Palestinians because Sharon, through his government policies, is destroying their home. They're being bulldozed in the middle of the night to make room for this wall, to make room for Israeli settlements and more security devices that Israel is scheming all the time.
I want to tell you, Damu, that while I was there in Israel, I had a kind of a vision of thousands of people, I would say starting with Christian people who ought to do their duty for themselves and for the world, going to Jerusalem and Palestine with a voice for nonviolent struggle, a voice that says war is not the way into the future. War will fail, as a way to find security, as a way to end terrorism. And the church...
War is not the answer.
Oh, my lands. If there's anything that's sure not to work, it's war. And that's what a lot of people are suspecting today, but don't quite know what the alternative is. The alternative is nonviolent struggle. Your people know that. Jesus knew that. Let's talk a little bit about nonviolent struggle. And let me mention again, I used a figure of 144,000 Christian nonviolent people going to Jerusalem, say next Easter, next summer, over a 6-month period, traveling across the world to say, we rise up and say that the future of the world is in nonviolent struggle. That is the only future for the world. How do you think about that?
Oh, I said nonviolence is definitely the way. Settling conflicts by killing another person and killing groups of people and destroying property and infrastructure and all of the things that, and destroying the environment, I might add, it's destroying humanity. It destroys the spirit of a people. It's destructive and wasteful at every level. So when you talk about killing and suffering, that's not going to solve the problem.
But we're told in this country that killing and suffering, war, is the price of freedom. You tell me, what is the price of freedom if that isn't the price of freedom?
Well, the price of freedom is waging justice and promoting peace as a cornerstone of our foreign and domestic policy. We've talked about values and the need for a radical transformation of values, as Dr. King talks about. A radical transformation of values means that we understand that the only thing that matters in the world is love and justice. And when we get to that point, we will understand that war and violence has no place in our lives, in our homes, in our personal interaction with people, in our thought processes. The thought of violence and killing someone and hurting someone is antithetical to the vision of Christ and Jesus. And so we cannot live in a world in which we think that occupation and war and militarism is going to answer our problems. We've already seen that in Iraq. What is war doing in Iraq? Making things so much worse than what they were even before we went to war. We had an opportunity to have a peaceful solution to the problem that ostensibly was enunciated as the problem. That was with weapons of mass destruction. That was a lie, of course. But now we see the price that we're paying for wanting to wage war and not make peace. There's more war and there's more violence, and it's an endless cycle when you promote violence.
It is a suicidal policy. As surely as I can predict what will happen when a man with explosives strapped around his waist detonates that, I can tell you what will happen when a nation, when an empire behaves in the world the way the United States is behaving in the world today. Those policies are suicidal.
Well, absolutely. And our government straps bombs around planes and men fly them. You know, there's a lot of focus on the suicide bombers coming from Palestine. There's no focus on the F-15, F-16 fighter jets that Israel has, supplied by the United States, the Apache attack helicopters that Israel has, the tanks. You know, there's no equality in this. But again, we're talking about the issues involving this conflict, but religion, Christianity is used, biblical scripture is used to get Christians in the United States to believe that we cannot criticize Israel, we cannot criticize U.S. support for Israeli policy, we cannot criticize Israel's leaders. That is wrong, and that is creating a situation where people have become paralyzed in their efforts to do what is necessary through the church.
Right.
To right this historical wrong in Palestine, which is bringing so much instability, war, violence, and terrorism, not only to the Middle East, but to the rest of the world, and creating divisions between Jews and Christians and Muslims all over the world. This is a major crisis, and it's a disaster. And it's important for the Christian churches and preachers to rise up and say this is wrong, and preach the gospel in the way that Jesus would want us to do, so that we understand what justice is really all about.
Well, exactly. And we started out talking about Jesus and the way. And you said Jesus taught the way of justice, the way of peacemaking, the way of compassion.
And mercy.
And mercy. You didn't say Jesus was the way to somewhere. You said he was the way of living in the world. I watched this debate about the 10 commandments, and then I think of Jesus' one commandment, love one another as I have loved you, and love your enemies. Why is it that his commandment doesn't even get onto the chart? You know, when people are talking about commandments, what might make the world work, you seem to really believe that love is practical, or that Jesus knew what he was talking about. What is the dynamic at work when we love our enemies?
Well, the problem that gets in the way are the material realities in the world that bring evil to the conversation and through the policies that our government and corporations are engaged in. If you love your neighbor, you don't super exploit your neighbor at the point of production in the maquiladoras areas of Mexico, where Mexican workers are getting paid $1 an hour in many instances for manufacturing goods and services there that we pay for in the form of lower prices on goods here. And these people are exposed to horrendous conditions in these workplaces, but that's not only happening in Mexico, but it's happening around the world. The value of how you treat your neighbor has to be embodied in the way you treat workers, the way you pay people, the conditions under which they work. And people are dying at the point of production in corporations around the world, manufacturing clothes and garments and carpets in Bangladesh and Pakistan and other parts of the world. So we have to see these values put in public policy.
Okay, so loving the neighbor gets played out in public policy, or it doesn't get played out at all.
Absolutely,
and
but when
it implements justice.
Absolutely, and when greed and the quest for profit and empire becomes a part of the quest, then the values embodied in biblical scripture and in other spiritual traditions gets thrown out the window. You start worshiping something else. You worship money, you worship profit, you worship greed and conquest and imperialism. These were the things that justified the colonization of Africa and Asia and Latin America and the Pacific Islands. We know this history. The Europeans did this. The Japanese Empire did this. And they did it in the name of freedom, but it was all about profit and conquest and empire. And we see our nation doing the same thing around the world. It's not going to work. Bullyism and militarism and greed and arrogance will get us nowhere. Justice and promoting peace will get us everywhere.
We've talked about Christian Zionism. I think it's time for a little definition from Stephen Sizer's book, Christian Zionists on the Road to Armageddon. He quotes Dale Crowley, who says, this Christian Zionist movement is a growing cult in America. It's not composed of crazies so much as mainstream middle to upper class Americans. They give millions of dollars each week to the TV evangelists who expound the fundamentals of the cult. They read Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye. They have one goal: to facilitate God's hand to waft them up to heaven, free from all the trouble, from where they will watch Armageddon and the destruction of planet Earth. Are these ideas influential in the way America conducts its foreign policy, do you think?
Well, I think so, because we see Bush all the time talking about, he uses the justification for militarism to tell people that this is the way that we're going to get to freedom and protect our freedom. And he lies in the process. You know, truth-telling is a very important part of what we as Christians and spiritual people need to be about, because lies and deception is what is getting us deeper and deeper into trouble. Because the president lied about why we went into Iraq. He said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none. The president is lying about the connection between Al-Qaeda and Iraq and Saddam Hussein. There was no connection. And they're lying about what's happening in Israel, Palestine. And those lies is going to get us, or getting us in a lot of trouble and deeper embroiled into more instability and violence in the Middle East. So I think we've got to take a hard look at all of this and see how we can be the way, through the pulpit and through our churches, to really look at what the gospel was all about.
Well, a peace church is a church which goes back before Constantine, that Roman emperor, pretended to become a Christian and to wrap his arms around Christians, for 200 years, Christians knew that there was a big difference between the way of Jesus and the way of the empire. And the way of Jesus was a costly way. It involved accepting some suffering. And is that still true? Does it mean accepting some suffering? We have about 2 minutes to wrap this up. What would you say?
Well, there's going to be suffering and sacrifice. Jesus suffered. We know that. This world is not a perfect world, and but we have to fight for freedom, and sometimes that means some of us might not make it. That happened in the civil rights movement. That happened in the anti-war movement. That happened in the anti-slavery movement. That happened during the Civil War. There's going to be suffering, but out of that will come joy, because joy cometh in the morning. And on the other side is a place of justice and freedom. If we envision it and work for it, we can achieve it.
Well, I believe that's true. And I believe that as clergy understand that the way of Jesus is a way through the world, not just a way out of or beyond the world. And they preach that, as you've said, Sunday mornings, if preachers called for doing justice and practicing peace, it would change things, and the church truly could turn the world toward peace if every church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. I hope that people will visit our website, ecapc.org, and look up Christian Zionism in the search engine there, and look up Black Voices for Peace website, and begin to, or increasingly inform yourself about the truths that will truly set us free. And that's our world, and that's our church, if we follow Jesus as he was teaching us the way to go.
You're absolutely correct.
Thank you, Damu, for being with us. And thank you for watching Every Church a Peace Church. I'm John Stoner, and I wish you well.
How long will it take till we realize we made a big mistake? If we turned our back on us, how long